morning. My name is Chris. I'm the campus pastor here. I just want to say welcome. I'm so glad to have you. So great to have you here today. Today we're starting a new series called Last Things First. Has anyone ever seen Antiques Roadshow? A few people, or kind of heard of it. I did not know that this show started in the 70s, and it started overseas, I believe, and it spread kind of throughout Europe and made its way to the States. So many spin-off shows of this series. I had no idea, but in the show there's these appraisers, and they come to these people who have these things or who bought these things, and they basically put a value on it and say they're an expert in their field, and they say this is worth this, or this is worth this, or you overpaid, or you underpaid, which is always good, right? Underpaying is always good. So we got a clip that we're going to watch together, and it's going to be kind of interactive. And so I'm going to call out a value, and I want you to say higher or lower, just kind of spontaneously, just shout it out. So we're going to practice, okay? So everybody say higher. Higher. Or we'll say lower. Lower. Okay, now pick one of the two, and we're going to do it all together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Higher. All right, so it's going to sound kind of like that. Ready? Roll the clip.
I brought my Rolex GMT Master that I bought 55 years ago. I bought it in Germany, in Zweibrücken, at a PX when I was in the Army over there.
All right, so watch, 1,500.
Higher.
Higher, all right, higher. Let's see what it is.
I'm speechless. If you would have told me 1,500, I would have been
65,000 to 75,000. All right, so that's a little warm-up. We got another one coming up.
And do you know who made this weaving? Do you know what kind of blanket it is?
It's probably a Navajo, but that's about all I know.
All right, so let's go 200,000. Higher or lower?
Higher.
Oh, kind of half and half. Lower, higher.
I'm amazed.
$350,000.
Back in 1871, my great-great-grandmother had a boarding house in Boston, and she housed the Boston baseball team. Most of them had come from Cincinnati Red Stockings, and were among the first to be paid to play baseball.
Okay, so let's go 1 million. Higher or lower? Lower?
Higher.
I have to say, you have hit a grand slam today.
Dollars. Can you believe that? $1 million. Now, even for Boston, I don't know if I'd pay $1 million. I love baseball, but I'm thinking, wow. Wow, these things are treasures, earthly treasures that these people... What do you think these people would do with them? Sell them. Who said sell them? I would sell them. I'm in line with him and pay off the debt and then live off the rest. But these things are treasures for these people. And it got me wondering, what do we do with our treasures? I don't have anything worth that much. My family's priceless, so I don't put them in that category. But I don't have any earthly thing that's worth that much. But there are things that I value, and I'm sure there are things that you value. And so I'm wondering, what would you do with your treasure? What would you do with these possessions that we have that you say, this to me is my treasure? I'm a guitar guy, and I used to be a car guy before I had to get an SUV and have a family vehicle. I used to like really nice new cars. When you have kids, then you get to make that transition. Throw that out for Chad in support of him. Hold on, Chad. Keep holding on. I remember when I got my guitar from graduating college. My parents, my grandparents all kind of went in together, and they got me a nice guitar. And there are still days. Okay, I've had that guitar for 8 years now, which is crazy to believe. I've been out of college for 8 years. But I have this guitar, and I'll pull it out, and I just sit there sometimes, and I admire it. I admire the craftsmanship of this instrument. I admire the beauty. Sometimes I'll smell it because I love it that much. I'll look at this stuff and admire it. Now, I do treasure my family. And as a father, last night I was sitting on the couch and all 3 boys jumped in my lap and I was just holding them and I was like, Becca, please come here and take a picture because I want to treasure this moment, because I find myself at times looking at the things that I love or the people that I love and just admiring them. I think we admire our treasures. And because we admire them, we want to display them, right? We want the world to see, like, look at this thing that I have. Before, when I used to have nice cars, I would, wash it really good, and I'd go hang out with my friends, and I'd pull up and say, oh yeah, check out the new Jeep. Holding on to this Jeep for a while. My guitars, I will come over or bring people over, and I'll say, hey, you want to see this new guitar I got? I mean, we just do this. We display it. Like with my family, if I lived 20 years ago, I would have a pocket dictionary size wallet in my back pocket because I'd pull it out and the pictures would fall down, and I'd just be showing you, well, this is Isaac and Caleb and Levi, and this is Becca, and look at her, she's beautiful. And I would just go on and on and on because we want to display our treasures. We want the people around us to say, wow, with us, because we long for this sense of community, and so we admire them, and our admiring leads us to displaying them. But the displaying goes so far because we want to protect them. Right? There's this guy, he's my best friend, and he was holding my guitar, and the strap came off, and he dropped it. And this other guy looked at him and said, you are the only person who could have done that. Because you are Chris's best friend, and everybody knows that. We protect our treasures. There's a certain distance that we keep between them and the risk of destruction. When there's a hurricane coming, the treasures get loaded up. Everything else, like we don't want to lose it, but we can part ways with it. But the treasures, they go with us. They get the extra special care. They're the things that kind of the rest of our stuff revolves around. Like there's a space for my guitar, and then there's a space for the other stuff. And the other stuff doesn't get where the guitar goes. And like in garages, there's the space for the nice motorcycle. And everything else has to be at least 5 foot away from it. And if it's tall enough that it can fall and hit it, then it has to be even further. Because we position everything around our treasures. We admire them, we want to display them, and we want to protect them. And the question that I have for you today is, what's your treasure? What are the things that you're holding to? What are the things that are most important in your life? We're starting this series called Last Things First because we understand this time of year, everybody starts reprioritizing their stuff, especially people with families. They're like, okay, we got to get back in rhythm. Summer's coming to a close. We've got to get everything in order. And we understand that as we get busy, as we speed up, the tendency is for the things that are most important, we let them slide into areas that are not the most important. We let our priorities, the things that are valuable to us, the things that are most important, if we're not careful, if we're not intentional about what we're doing, we let these things kind of slide into other orders. And we put things that aren't so important, really, when we think about it, in their place. And so this whole series for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about a bunch of different things that we say, hey, this probably needs to be somewhere in the top. These things probably need to be in the first 4 spots in your priority order. No matter where you are, we believe these things should be close. And if these things are in the top of your list, it's going to set you up to live a life that I think honors God and helps us become more like Him. And so the first thing we're going to talk about today is faith. Our faith, I believe, needs to be number one. We're going to look at a parable that Jesus spoke in Matthew chapter 13. And I like this chapter because it's a bunch of parables, but I don't like this chapter because it's a bunch of parables. Because parables sometimes are hard to understand. You really got to dig in, and it's like, what is Jesus really saying? What's He really getting at? So He uses these parables, and this is what He says. You'll see it on the screen. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When the man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all that he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. If you look at chapter 13, you see repeated this phrase, the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like. And so Jesus is explaining to the people around him, hey, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like, I don't know about you, but when I think about heaven, I think about some pretty awesome stuff. I think about some really incredible things. And when I think about it, there's a lot of people that I think about heaven and say, yeah, punch my ticket. I want to go there because there's some awesome stuff there. I mean, growing up in the church, especially as a pastor's kid, we sung songs about heaven. You know what I'm saying? We heard in the scriptures the things about heaven. We heard about the streets made of gold. I'll just take a brick. I don't need a whole road. I don't need a whole street. Just give me one brick. I heard about the mansions that we would sing about and all these things. And Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. And this place is full of awesome stuff and all these different things. And there's no sickness in heaven. There's no disease. There's no addiction. There's no struggles. There's family there. There's friends there. It's a great party all the time. I mean, I heard all of these awesome things about heaven. And I don't know about you, but that stirs me up and makes me want to go there because of all of the stuff. The problem is this is a parable. And the parable is not actually about working your way into this place. Because if you misinterpret it, you say, well, does that mean I have to go out and I have to work really hard and do all I can to get to heaven? It's not really about a place at all. I was reading this book a few years ago, and this quote was in this book, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm going to paraphrase it. And it said this. It said, if you went to heaven and you had the streets of gold and the mansions and the no storms and no sickness and no addictions and none of the negative, but you had all the positives like family and friends and all of these things, but Jesus wasn't there, would you want to stay? Or would you want to go? You see, heaven's not about a bunch of stuff. Heaven's not about getting from Jesus. You see, in Jesus' day, Jesus would walk through this earth, and he would walk along the earth, and he had this huge following. These massive amounts of people would follow Jesus because Jesus was doing really incredible things like taking water and turning it into wine. But not just like average wine. He was taking water and turning it into the best wine. And there were people that were like, yeah, I'll have some of that. Well, let me follow this man around. He would take fish and bread and he would multiply it and he would feed everybody to their fill. Okay, so like all you can eat buffet, and then there's leftovers. Like you get a plate to go, like Thanksgiving at Nana's house. There's always leftovers at Nana's house. Jesus was doing all these things. He was raising people from the dead. He was walking on water. He was doing all of this stuff. And people were following him because they're like, I want some of that. I want to get from Jesus. But here's the reality. The kingdom of heaven is not about stuff. It's not about getting from God. Heaven is about Jesus. It's always been Jesus. It will forever be Jesus. It'll never not be Jesus. This is the gospel. Heaven is not about us getting stuff. Heaven is about getting us in an eternal place where we can enjoy the presence of God and be completely satisfied in Him. It's about eternally being in the presence of God the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. It's about that. It's not about the stuff, and the stuff is beneficial, like it's great, but it's all secondary or beyond that. The primary thing about heaven is that we eternally get to be in the presence of God, and we can be completely satisfied in Him. Because Jesus is the treasure. There's a man who's walking through this field and he stumbles upon something. And there's a treasure. And in his joy, he gets rid of everything so that he can have this. Jesus is the treasure. He's the one that we should admire. Like he's the one we should look at and say, He's the one that we should display in our lives, that we should walk around and live in such a way that people look at us and they're like, wow. And it's not because they're seeing anything within us. It's because they're seeing Jesus on display in our life. And because they see Jesus in our lives, they're like, what is so wonderful and attractive about you? And it's not the new haircut. It's not the great updo. It's Jesus in our lives. And Jesus is the one we should protect. Not that he's in danger. Not that we are protecting him from something. No, he's the one that we should protect. He's the one that everything revolves around. I've got this guy that I know who's got this violin that is priceless. It's a violin. It's one of like 100 that was made in the 1700s. And it's in mint condition. This was his instrument that he played. The craftsmanship is incredible. I've actually never even seen it in person. I've just heard about it. But I've heard him in videos play this thing, and it's awesome. Well, when they go somewhere, because he has to travel to play, everything about the trip revolves around the violin. The temperature in the car. The temperature in the building when they arrive. When they travel, the violin has an armored case that it goes in. I've got good cases, but not like this. This is an armored case, this violin. His pillows go around the case in the car, and it has its own seatbelt. Like, I'm talking about this thing is protected. That's not the kind of protection I'm talking about with Jesus. The kind of protection I'm talking about is they planned the whole trip according to the violin. When we admire Jesus and display him and see him as our treasure, our whole life should revolve around him. Our whole existence, our whole being should revolve around him because he is so wonderful and he is so great and he is this extreme treasure that we could never purchase or earn in ourselves. Well, Chris, how do we get it? Is there enough good that I have to do? Is there like a checklist of works and prayers and all these things? No, the gospel is simple. We believe he is who he said he was. That he did die and he did raise again to life. And we confess that we need him. We confess that there are things in my life that I just get wrong, and I keep getting wrong. And the more I try to get them right, I just still get wrong. That's called sin. It's just this missing of the mark. It's if I want to hit the mark and I land over here consistently, and I can never hit the mark, I need some help. I need a Savior, and that's Jesus. That's the good news. We confess and believe. And when you do that, you know what the great news about Jesus is and the great news about him being the treasure is? When we do that, we become the treasured people of God. And Jesus is for his treasured people. This is really good news because this means that Jesus admires you. There's something with not in and of yourself, but because he calls you good, because he looks at you and gives you worth, he pursues you. And he wants you. He's calling you. And I would believe that most of us here today, Jesus is calling because he wants you. He wants you to live a life that glorifies him. He wants you to live a life that is completely and totally satisfied in him. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is this: have you seen him? Have you seen Jesus? I'm convinced he's calling you. I'm convinced he's pursuing you. I'm convinced he's running after you with his love and his grace. And he wants you to be in a relationship with him. He wants you to live with him. He wants you to experience his grace and his mercy. He wants you to see him with new eyes so that when you see him, you take a step back and you say, wow, look at this. Look how marvelous. Look how wonderful. Look how beautiful he is. And when you admire him in that way, you say, my family has got to see this. My friends has got to see this. My coworker has got to, even the guy down the street that I don't really like, but he's got to see this because this is so wonderful. We begin to display it in our lives and we begin to protect it, meaning that we center our whole lives around the idea that he is the treasure. He is wonderful and he is glorious. Have you seen him? Have you seen him? Do you know his worth? Have you seen him? Because when you see Jesus, you'll be overjoyed to rid yourself of everything falling around. You see, this guy was going through the field and he stumbles over this thing, and maybe he wasn't even looking for it, but then he saw it. And in his joy, he said, nothing else compares. Nothing else even comes close to this. And he got rid of everything so he could obtain the treasure. And I'm not saying we work our way into heaven, so don't misinterpret the message. But I'm saying when we see him and we begin to follow him, everything else fails in comparison. So are you here today, and maybe you weren't even looking for this. Maybe somebody brought you here. Maybe you followed a cute girl in here. I don't know, but you're here. And for some reason, Jesus has chosen to show you in this way that this is his treasure. Or maybe you're like the merchant. And you're walking through this life, you're looking for something specific to give you purpose and to give you meaning. You're looking for something to change everything for you. You're looking for peace. You're looking for joy, because everything you've been looking for peace and joy, and it just seems to fail in comparison. It just doesn't seem to satisfy. You've been looking down the neck of a bottle. You've been looking in substances. You've been looking at bad relationships. You've been looking in your career. You've been looking in all of these different things for something that would just give you value and worth. You've been looking, and today you've seen that it may look a little different than you thought. But that this Jesus is a treasure that gives us life and joy and peace. And this is not found in anything we could do. It's found in a person. It's found in Jesus. And if you would believe today and confess today, you could live that life that brings complete and total satisfaction. And your life may never change, meaning your circumstances might not. But your life has changed because you have him. So have you seen him? Is Jesus your treasure? Are you living in a way that your life would be evidence that he is your treasure? That in your joy, in your laughter, in your celebrations, you get rid of everything to follow